November 25th, 2024, 6 p.m., City Council Chambers, 111 East Maple. Mr. City Manager, welcome. And the first is a general obligation bond discussion. We've had a number of discussions on this, but we wanted to have it in this setting so we can have some more discussion. So I will give the floor to you and let you proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Good evening. As the mayor said, my name is Zach Walker, the city manager. My purpose tonight for this presentation is really to help illustrate for the council and the community how we got to where we are this evening with the general obligation bond conversation, where we stand now in relation to that conversation, and then should the council see wisdom in proceeding with asking the voters to support an issue, where we would go from here. So that is what we'll try to cover tonight, and happy to then, of course, stand for questions as well. We thought we would start again with just a reminder of what is a general obligation bond. So you may have heard this referred to as a GO bond or a GO bond. We just want to make sure everybody's got the same vernacular there. But a general obligation bond is a financing tool that is authorized by both the Missouri Constitution and Missouri state statute as a means to borrow money to pay for capital construction projects. Now, these kind of bonds are very attractive to investors in the marketplace because they are backed by the full faith, credit, and taxing power of a municipality. So that means every year the city is promising that it is going to make debt service payments on these bonds. The revenue to make those payments comes through property taxes on all taxable property in the city. So whether that is agricultural, residential, commercial use, all those properties, unless there's some sort of an exemption, an abatement, or otherwise, are subject to that taxation. These bonds have to be repaid back within 20 years, so not an extended period of time, but also not an immediate one-year fiscal impact either. Speaking of fiscal impact, the full impact of a bond issue is not going to land on your tax bill all in 1 year. That tax levy is only raised concurrent with when bonds are issued. So as you'll see tonight, there are a number of projects that we would not be able to complete in 1 year's time. So your property tax would be adjusted annually based on how much debt the city has issued relative to the number of projects that we're working on in any given year. Again, these can only be paid for to do capital projects. We can't use them for things like employee salaries, can't use them to go buy things like paper clips or pencils or those kind of supplies. These are to do projects, streets, roads, bridges, sidewalks, buildings in your city. Also, just another good time to point out that Independence is somewhat unique in that we have not to this point utilized this tool. Most of the cities that surround Independence, and certainly many more across the state, have been using this tool for decades now to make these strategic investments in their community, things like community growth, community betterment, quality of life, have been the objective for utilizing these general obligation bonds in other communities, and I know have certainly informed your conversations as a council. What we're talking about tonight did not just happen. It didn't just fall out of the sky, or we're not just showing up tonight with an idea for you. Tonight represents what I would say is at least 8 years worth of work. And if you go back almost 8 years ago to the day, this week, the council, by consensus, directed me to prepare recommendations for what action steps the city could take to improve citizen satisfaction with maintenance of city assets. That came on the heels of an annual citizen satisfaction survey that highlighted a strong level of dissatisfaction with the city's performance in maintaining things like streets and bridges and parks, etc. For us as staff to help make recommendations to the council to improve that, we first felt like we needed to understand what the magnitude of the problem was. And in December of that same year, we prepared and presented to the council a deferred maintenance report that cataloged and inventoried all of the maintenance and improvement projects that were unfunded or deferred for an extended period of time due to the high number of projects for various funding sources. So let me say that again. These projects would be ones that would probably typically be funded by things like the street sales tax, the park sales tax, the police and fire capital sales tax. However, the demand and the need is so great that our sales tax revenue does not allow us to keep up with these projects on an annual basis or even within our 5-year capital improvements plan. That's why these are referred to as deferred maintenance. They're not allowed, they're not able to be included in any kind of plan of financing because the resources aren't there to fund them. The report, the deferred maintenance report, made what I would call 3 key recommendations. One was the street sales tax was set to expire in 2018. Recommendation was made that that needed to be renewed at the half-cent level. Second recommendation was made that the city needed to stay on top of utility rates so that the utilities infrastructure would not fall into extended dish repair. We already have this issue with our other assets. Let's not allow that to happen onto the utility side. And then the last recommendation was let's find a new funding source that would infuse new dollars into the city's finances to help us pay for these deferred capital needs. So knowing the magnitude of the issue and with these recommendations in mind, this council spent the better part of 2023 evaluating strategies to maximize our infrastructure investment and to do the greatest good for the greatest number of citizens over the long haul. That really led up to then this past August 5th, the council approved a resolution appointing 21 individuals to the Independence General Obligation Bond Advisory Committee. And that committee, which Councilmember Perkins served as the liaison to, was tasked with determining and recommending how much a bond issue amount should be, the various categories to be included in a bond, and then the amount allocated to each of those categories. That committee met 6 times from August through November and did a tremendous amount of work, and you heard the chairman, Doug Cowan's presentation at your most recent study session back on November the 12th. Those recommendations determined that there was substantial evidence indicating that a successful community periodically authorizes the use of general obligation bonds to invest in themselves, and that many of the city's proposed investments are significantly overdue. Now, the committee did go on to say that the council, the city council, is best positioned to determine the appropriate allocation of funds to ensure maximum investment. And to that end, you guys all got together back on November 19th to discuss the projects and the amounts to include in the proposed bond. And that brings us to this slide. So the first column up there shows this original plan that we were kicking around in 2023. It was a nice, tight little package of $250 million across several different categories. As city staff began to dive into deeper and identify true costs for some of these needs, one of the more significant changes was the cost in the Justice Center. So the committee, you can see, recommended that $125 million be allocated to that project. We as a staff were able to provide you with a little bit more of a refined number at your meeting last week, which is reflected here. The other major difference here is that the council, in your considerations, determined that while the rec center is a need in the community, while there could be great value and utility in that, it's an idea that time has not yet come, that needs to be fleshed out more, investigated more, to answer the question that Chairman Cowan put forward, which was the rec center asking itself, what am I? So ultimately, what I would draw your attention to is the column that says CAC Option 1. That is Citizen Advisory Committee Option 1, and the council's consensus from your meeting last week. What you'll notice in each of those categories is that those figures are nearly identical to the recommendation in Option 1 from the 21-member committee. The only difference, of course, being that the recreation center is not included, and you can see that the committee in option 2 does not have the rec center funded. So my point there is this committee of 21 individuals from across the community clearly did very thoughtful work, and the council has, by and large, accepted that recommendation nearly to the penny of what was recommended. Now I think it's appropriate for us to talk about a little bit more what each of these categories funds. And we'll start with the Justice Center. Have that listed at $127 million, but that's really comprised of 2 parts. $123 million is the all-in hard and soft cost of construction of the Justice Center campus. $4 million is included to remediate the area where the current police station sits, so that we can make that area suitable for redevelopment and not leave a hole here on the eastern side of the Independence Square. And I'll talk about that more in a moment. One of the things I think is really critical to point out in this conversation, we as city staff, working with our project consultants, want to ensure an adequate and accurate budget for this project. It would be highly problematic if we had to come back to you and say, oops, things changed, costs have gone up, labor costs more, materials cost more, the number we came up with doesn't really work anymore, you need to go back to the voters and get us some more money. That is in my opinion, unacceptable outcome. So what you will see in this $123 million budget is a 9% escalation cost. What that means is that we are anticipating when construction starts on this project in the second quarter of 2026, which would be roughly late spring, early summer timeframe, what costs at their worst could be. So we've built in a 1.5% increase in pricing for every quarter between now and the second quarter of 2026. We believe, in working with our professionals in the industry, that that gives us sufficient cushion to ensure that we don't have an inadequate budget to build the facility that is being contemplated. There are a number of benefits to this plan of centralizing all of the functions. I know there's been conversation about, do we do a phased approach, or what does this look like? I want to highlight just again some of the benefits of that. By building this consolidated campus, we are able to close 4 different facilities. Those properties would then be sold for redevelopment, so that brings revenue to the city. It takes care of excess supply and surplus property that the city either has to maintain now or would have to maintain. I would tell you, in speaking with our consulting team, that the buildings themselves probably don't hold a lot of value. Ergo, that's why we're talking about replacing them. But the land they're on is valuable to many in the development community, and we think the city would be very competitive in being able to sell that for redevelopment. Consolidating these functions at a centralized campus will also have a cost savings to the city. So Chief Dustman and his command staff actually calculated the cost of a decentralized model today. So the different functions as they sit today, having to traverse between these satellite locations and the current police headquarters in terms of police officer salary time, fuel, and the maintenance cost of a vehicle is around $58,000. So if we're consolidated, that's an annual amount that we're going to save. If we don't consolidate those functions right now, moving the headquarters to the geographic center of the city that's being proposed, that's going to add longer travel time for some of these other functions, and we would actually be at risk of tripling the decentralization cost. That would be closer to $185,000. So there is a dollar amount associated with if we are not centralizing these functions on a consolidated campus. I also want to just highlight, celebrate, but also clarify about growth. So this facility has been designed to accommodate growth for the next 50 years. So we are leaving things better than we found it, which is a challenge I always issue to our staff. That number is listed at 86 employees, but let me clarify that. In reality, that's a little bit closer to 42 employees. If you think about it, police is a 24/7 operation. Not everybody works 24 hours, of course, so you have people that have shared workspaces. You know, when a shift changes, one person leaves, the other person takes their computer. So even though it would allow for growth of 86 new employees, it's not built for 86 more people. It's actually built for an additional 42 people over the next 50 years, which is less than one new employee per year for the next 50 years. This is a police facility, which influences costs. There are certain building code requirements for a police department that we have to abide by. There is something called the ICC 500 shelter requirement. That means that police stations have to have a storm shelter for critical emergency operations. The International Building Code, risk category 4, also requires increased structural capacities for things like wind, snow, and seismic loads. So this isn't building a house, this isn't building the grocery store. There are specific building codes for a police station that influence cost. I will say that, and as the project owner's representative shared with you last month, this team really worked hard to make smart decisions on things like layouts, to take advantage of operating efficiencies, to program spaces in a way that promoted the greatest productivity and collaboration in this space. The materials that are in this space are in line with comparable police stations. You know, I know there's been a lot of questions of, are there things that could be rolled back or reduced? And I'm confident in standing here that our materials, our design, our layout is in line with these other comparable stations, and I'll give you an example of that momentarily. I also, again, just think it's important to stress and hammer on the last two lines of this project budget, which are escalation and project contingencies. I explained escalation to you being increased costs in the market. Contingencies are things like the architect or the design team, the construction team is taking longer than they thought, or some sort of unforeseen issue like unknown fees and permits, unforeseeable conditions like poor soil quality, abandoned utilities on the site, relic foundations at the site. You know, anything when you put a shovel in the ground and you don't really know what you're going to find. Our thought as staff is certainly when we get to the point of designing and constructing this facility to make these performance-based contracts that incentivize not having delays, not having additional add-ins put onto this contract. Now again, there are unforeseen conditions at times, but the more we can incentivize folks to stay on time and on budget, the lower that amount could be. So again, I just want to really stress that without the escalation and without the contingencies in there, you're actually looking at a $99.8 million project. So again, 123 is a lot, but 123 is that cushion amount of what if worst case scenario comes to pass. So I don't have to come in here and tell you you can't build the facility that you thought you were getting as a taxpayer and as a council member. I've heard a lot about the Lenexa Justice Center that cut their ribbon this past August. Fortunate for all of you, good working professional relationship with the Lenexa City administrative team over there. So I was able to get some data to help us understand how our facility as being contemplated compares to theirs. Our population in Independence compared to Lenexa, they're about 69% of our population. So you might think, okay, well then I bet our building is 69% larger than theirs. Actually, no, our building is 41% larger than theirs. Might think, well, their police force is 70% larger, so we have to have a building that's 70% larger. No, again, our building is 41% larger than what theirs is. Well, I bet that means then that we're going to be 41% more on our cost. No, 9.8%, less than 10% cost difference between the Lenexa facility and ours. That is largely attributable, and I mean this in a very professional way, but some of the enhancements, finishings, features, amenities of the Lenexa Center compared to what is included in our facility. So again, I'm really confident that this has been designed in a way that is respectful of our community's socioeconomic status, but also meeting the needs of our department for the next 50 years. I also want to just point out that there's a lot, in here. There's a lot that is not in here, I should say, again, because we want to be good stewards of the taxpayer money. Here are a few examples of things that would have been nice for the police department to have, but ultimately was left on the cutting room floor to make sure this project budget was as tight as could be. Today, our police department fuels their vehicles and has them serviced at 23rd and Chrysler. It's quite a ways away from where they are today. It's quite a ways away from where they're going to be. There would have been some efficiencies of having that consolidated on one campus, but we're going to keep making that other model work for now. A virtual training simulator. This is a tool that allows officers to train on going into a situation and the quick judgment calls that have to be made in potentially hostile situations. Would have been nice to have that as a training tool for our department. Was left out. Ground source HVAC. If you've ever had a ground source heat pump, I have not, but I've been to places that do. That's very nice. It's very energy efficient. Would have been a nice to have. It's left out. I'll call out the dedicated SWAT locker room. If our SWAT team goes to a scene and they have to deploy tear gas or they are exposed to certain chemicals, when they come back, it would have been nice to have a separate locker room with a special ventilation system that does not bring those chemicals into the main part of the campus. That was left out. There were also alterations that have been made to help contain costs. Today, in our police station, many of our detectives actually have their own private office space. We are building this with what we call co-working space, where there'll be open floor plans. Private offices are more walls, that costs more money. The SWAT equipment, the accident investigation and bomb squad team and equipment, and our fleet maintenance team, those are all going to work out of Morton Buildings. The stone, masonry, brick finishings were left on the cutting room floor. We're putting Morton Buildings up too. I'm confident they'll be visually appealing, but again, that brings costs down, so we're not running over there. So now I'm going to spend just a little time talking about the campus itself, and to help orient everyone, in center top of this image is a red rectangle. That is the existing Independence Utility Center building that you see today. Above that is 23rd Street. To the left of that is R.D. Mize Road. And then down below is MCI Parkway, and Clothier Park is across the street from here. Kind of working clockwise around, that yellow square in the upper left-hand quadrant, that would be the new addition for police. That would be municipal court. So you'd have administrative offices as well as the court there. Below that, that forest green color, that what was proposed to be the training facility for the police department. Again, that has been deferred as a cost prohibitive item for now. We'll work to accommodate those needs in the interim, but that was an item that was not prioritized. Certainly, our department or command staff would tell you it's a priority, but again, making these tough judgment calls about budget, that's something that is being deferred. Below that, the pink is the firing range. Just want to assure everybody that firing range is built in such a way that as a civilian on the outside, you'll have no idea what's going on in there. They're soundproof, they're bulletproof, safe, nothing to worry about there. But this isn't a very important part of a police officer maintaining their certification. And for our team to be able to have access to a range is an essential part of their job. That white box is the existing 911 Emergency Operations Center. Above that, that blue box is the SWAT team staging area for their equipment, as well as our tech base, so where light bars get put on cars, where mobile data command centers get put in the vehicles, that area. The kind of brownish, maroonish color up above that is the accident investigations area. So when cars are kept, because they've been involved in an accident, that would be the staging area for that. And the blue area, the aqua color above that, is the K-9 unit. So that's kind of a look at what the campus looks like, and then just some images to help bring this to life. This is the exterior building looking east of the municipal court. This is looking back west at the municipal court and that public entryway. This is kind of facing to the southeast and looking at the exterior of the public entry into the police department, not the court, but the actual police department itself. And then here's kind of an overall view of the campus itself. I told you earlier that $4 million was being included for the remediation of the existing site of the police department. As I've shared with you before, this area right here is really commanding valuable real estate that is not serving as an economic engine for our community. So we're really trying to wildly reimagine how we use public space for better outcomes for our residents. What really started as a facilities conversation about this police station turned into and picked up along with it, I should say, an economic development conversation. And downtown being an important part of Independence, very unique to Independence, with the history, with the design, et cetera, is very important. And that's not just me saying that. Our most recent citizen satisfaction survey had over 90% of respondents say that maintenance and preservation of the square was a priority for them. So we want to do our part by making that area suitable for redevelopment, making sure that the police station is brought down in a responsible way. City Hall, as you may recall, is already budgeted for demolition in the acquisition of the former GEHA property, so that's already funded. But this would make sure that the site is fully remediated, utilities brought to the site, and future development is what we call shovel ready. All right, so I'm going to switch now to the animal shelter. Ultimately, the council landed on $3 million, which was just $1 million off of the Citizen Advisory Committee recommendation. As a reminder, this building is owned by the county, and the city owns the land that sits underneath of it. And as I've said before, a very awkward arrangement in that. Currently, the county owes about $3.34 million on that building, but by the time this bond would pass, this would be closer to $3 million. There are a number of facility issues that need to be addressed. And again, it's not being a wise steward of the financial public taxpayer dollars if the city's making investments into a facility we don't own. So the council's discussion and the committee's discussion on this was if we can consolidate ownership into a single owner, that being the city, then it makes more sense to start assessing the physical infrastructure, the quality of the building, and making determinations about future investments and even enhancements into that facility. But $3 million, again, looking at this through what does the community need, maybe not necessarily what we want, this resolves a pretty big sticking point in our community conversation. Street reconstruction and overlay is recommended for $30 million. When I talk about street maintenance, you're really talking about 4 different kind of categories of maintenance in there. And at the city, we do something called a pavement condition index assessment, where we have a technology in which we drive every city street, and it's able to collect data and rate the quality of a city street from 0 to 100. And the average street in Independence rates at a 50. So the average grade of a street in Independence is failing, is another frank way to say that. The images on this slide are some examples of those failing grade streets. These, all 4 pictures here, are streets with a score of 50 across the community. Ultimately, what was discussed was a 5-year plan for street maintenance. That really lines up nicely with the city's 5-year capital improvements plan. It's very manageable in that regard. These funds would be used in addition to the street sales tax funds. They would not supplant that, but roughly they would allow us to double the amount of funds that are going into our overlay program each year. When I say roughly, it may be even a little bit more, but it would generally equate to that amount. I've been asked, do we know what streets this would be yet? We would continue as staff to do our data collection through pavement condition index assessment, and then work with the council to determine equity among all 4 council districts. But I don't think we're limiting ourselves to any kind of street. This could be everything from a major roadway like Noland Road all the way to a residential street like East 30th Street Court South, or another one of those fun Independence street names. It's also kind of difficult for us to specify how many lane miles we'd be able to improve. Oil pricing is very volatile. The contractor availability can be very volatile depending on what other municipalities or the state of Missouri is doing. The timing of when we go to bid can certainly influence that. So I think it would be irresponsible to say we'll definitively do this amount, but what I can tell you is it will double the dollar amount of what we're able to do right now through the street improvement sales tax. And while I'm on the sales tax, I think it's also just important to answer a question of what is my sales tax funds going toward? I've heard that, and I think that's important to address. Right now, again, roughly half of the amount that's collected in the street sales tax goes to the pavement maintenance program. The remainder of those funds go into one of these buckets. In 2017, the council approved what we called a mini bond, which allowed us to catch up on some really emergency level priorities by issuing $15 million of debt out of the street sales tax. Right now, the street sales tax is paying back that $15 million mini bond that was issued for some of those emergency-like projects and purchases. We also fund snow operations, materials, salt and sand and all the things that have to be put on the roadway to make the road safe to drive on. Our crack filling and pothole patching program is also funded out of here. And then finally, there are some of our street maintenance workers' salaries, the men and women who are performing things like pothole patching and crack filling, that also have a small percentage of salary allocated to this fund as well. Okay, sidewalks, $10 million. $10 million is the amount that is needed to address priority sidewalk projects. And when I say priority, my staff met with leadership from the Independent School District and the Fort Osage School District and said, if there were funds available to address sidewalks to your schools, what would your priorities be? Independence and Fort Osage together identified 7 different schools that are priorities. That includes in Independence, Fairmont, Castle Park, Blackburn, Ott, and Mill Creek, pardon me. With Fort Osage, that is Elm Grove and Claremont Elementary Schools. Some of these schools would have, very specific issues, like let me give you an example. The Independent School District has reported to us that at Mill Creek Elementary, near the crossing guard, part of the sidewalk is half buried due to settlement and erosion. It would address that where the sidewalk is now buried. But at each of the schools, the main road access in all directions around the school, sidewalks would be brought into the schools to help make sure kids have safe passageway that choose to walk to school. Bridges and culverts, $15 million. At this moment, as we sit here tonight, there are 4 bridges in town that are closed because they're unsafe to drive on. And we have 9 additional bridges that have to be fixed within the next 7 years, or they're also going to have to be closed. So this plan allocates the $15 million to address those 13 bridges, as well as replacing many culverts in our city infrastructure. Now, culverts don't seem particularly glamorous, but let me tell you why that might be important. If anybody remembers earlier this year when Bunshoe Road had to be closed for an extended period of time, that was because a culvert in the roadway failed and therefore the road crumbled underneath of it. So if we can get out with this as you'll see in a minute, $3.5 million, we can start to replace the culverts in our inventory, make sure that our community doesn't face disruption because a road has failed due to a culvert failure. These are some pictures of some of the bridges that we're talking about. Again, bridge repair may not seem like a particularly glamorous thing, but if you're one of the people who in one way, shape, or form are impacted by this, I can tell you this matters. Bridges help promote neighborhood connectivity. They help promote public safety, for our police and firefighters who are trying to get to the scene of an emergency. If they're not able to take the most direct route because of a bridge closure, that time could impact the outcome of the emergency call that they're going to. Bridges help provide access to jobs. They help the businesses in our community ensure the most efficient transportation of goods and services to help keep their costs down. And there's a psychological impact. If you come up on one of these bridges that looks like this, what does that say about your community or how your city feels about you? So these are the 13 bridges that are proposed to be replaced. I probably won't read these, all 13, Mayor, but anybody can download this presentation and see the bridges that are programmed in here, as well as that $3.5 million that's included to replace culverts throughout the city. Historic Sites is proposed for $7 million, and in using round figures, that's about $2.2 million for the Vail Mansion, that's about $3.8 million for the Bingham Wagner Estate, and just under $1 million for the Truman Memorial Building. Preserving historic sites in Independence can be important for several reasons. They contribute to our cultural, social, and economic well-being. They have a significant representation of our past and the broader history of our region. And they help play an important role with tourism, attracting visitors who are interested in exploring Independence history. These are very unique to our identity. I've joked before that lots of towns have an old house that you can go tour. Few have as many and that hold as important cultural significance as Independence has. So $7 million for this will address the long overdue maintenance at these sites that's needed to ensure, frankly, their viability for the future, to ensure that there is still a Vail Mansion standing, that there still is a Bingham Wagner Estate still standing. And I also just want to call out for the council, if you'll notice in these images, these aren't just buildings. These are places where there is vibrant activity happening in our community. Things that are really important to the Independence identity, like the Strawberry Festival, Wine Fest, which has become a major regional draw for Independence, and the annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration at the Truman Memorial Building. These are gathering places that help mark each year for us and help us celebrate as a community together. Now on the tours with our Citizen Advisory Committee, one thing that I think really stood out for that group was the Independence Athletic Complex. That's somewhat of a hidden gem, and we think that that's probably not a good thing. This could be a real economic driver for Independence if it were developed in the right way to attract regional athletic tournaments. It's a 165-acre site, which gives us a lot of landscape to work with and to program and develop. Right now, there are 17 fields that represent baseball, football, and softball. And so it's kind of developed with a little bit of a mentality of something for everyone. We really think we can be thoughtful about figuring out what is the gap in the market where Independence could develop the complex in such a way that allows us to become a player for some of these regional tournaments and the hotel room nights, the restaurant sales that are associated with that kind of programming. I also want to point out that this $5 million would allow us to add lots of new amenities. So some development on the other side of Salisbury Road, like a new park over there, a new restroom facility, a new spray ground in that area, a new off-leash dog park. So it wouldn't just be about renovating that facility. This would also add and expand the amenities there for the people, not just in the community, but also in Northeast Independence. Okay, so those are sort of the categories. Now I just want to show the council how the finances shake out on this. So under the state statutes, the city's legal debt limit is a total of about $440 million. Under state law, 10% of that can go for general purposes, and then an additional 10% can go for any street-related use, which our bond council has determined things like bridges, things like sidewalks, are part of a street-related use. So under our bonding authority of $220 million for streets, this plan has $55 million, so lots of capacity there. And then the general limit of $220 million, this has $142 million in it, still below the legal debt limit there as well, and leaving capacity if the city has other needs that arise in future years. Okay, I'm going to do my best to explain pricing on this. This, again, slide is available online, so I would encourage folks who are interested to spend some time with this. We've also had some internal conversations as we start to build our public-facing website for all this information about even including a calculator, which would allow people to help compute their own personal fiscal impact. But let me give you a general sense of how this works. In this example, we're going to use just a home that has a market value of $100,000. Now, market value is not, what your home sold for. What your home sold for is what somebody was willing to pay you. But when the county assesses your home, they come and they value what the worth of your home is. And so in this example, we're going to use $100,000. Under state law, residential property is assessed at 19%. That is just a factor that is set by state law, okay? So in this example, this home has an assessed valuation of $19,000. For the amount of debt that we're talking about, $197 million, that would require, at its full implementation, when all the bridges have been built and all the roads have been overlaid and all the historic sites have been fixed and the Justice Center has been built and the athletic complex has been built out and the animal shelter has been bought, that's a 82 cents per $100 of assessed valuation, okay, at its high watermark. So to calculate this, look at E. You take the value in D, which in our example is 82 cents. You divide that by 100 because of the $100 per assessed valuation, and then you multiply that times your assessed value. So in my example here, this home of $100,000 would have an annual obligation on their taxes of $155.80, okay? This looks at the median home value in Independence. So in Independence, if you go look at the United States Census Bureau, the median home value has been identified as $150,800. And again, this isn't what the median home sells for. This is when you take all the homes in Independence and what the county has valued them at, $150,800. Using that formula that we used on our last slide, that would mean the median home in Independence would have an annual tax obligation of $235, rounded up. Now, a lot of people who have a mortgage on their home pay a monthly mortgage payment. And part of that mortgage payment is collecting an amount to go into escrow to pay your property taxes at the end of the year. So I thought it would be helpful to use the monthly cost. This is the amount that your lender may say you owe in addition to help satisfy your increased property tax. In that, this is a little less than 20 bucks a month, $19.57, or on a daily cost, 64 cents. And then for anybody that wants to sort of play around with this, here is the per $100,000 value. So again, that $155 a year. For every $100,000 that your home is valued at, you would just, if it's a $200,000 home, take that times 2. If it's a $300,000 home, take that times 3. It's a general rule of thumb that could help you start to understand the fiscal impact. Okay, so what's coming up, starting with first reading next week, is an ordinance that would call for an election in April and have 3 different questions. Our bond counsel, on advice and having researched state statute, says that organizing the questions in such a way to comply with state law is obviously most advisable, because we don't want to have somebody challenge the legality of the bond issue and then we have forfeited the funds that were approved by the voters. So this has been organized as question 1, which collectively puts together the public safety related items at $130 million. Question 2, which is those street and infrastructure related items, at $55 million. And then the parks and historic sites question 3, which is $12 million for the $197 million question. First reading of that ordinance, as I mentioned, will be December 2nd. Second reading on December 16th. I also think it's important to point out that the Square Master Plan is also on your agenda for next week to adopt that. I believe that's important to point out because, again, as we start to contemplate what future redevelopment of this area that we're in tonight looks like, that master plan starts to give us some guidance of what that could look like. So if the community has questions about what might the city put there someday, that gives us some very good idea and guidance of what the council is formally committing to moving forward. We do recommend forming a Recreation Center Advisory Committee. We are planning to bring that to you for consideration on December 16th. Again, Mr. Cowan, as the chairman of that committee, posed the thoughtful question of the rec center asking, what am I? You've got a lot of thoughtful citizens on your GeoBond committee who showed a strong interest in a future rec center, but wanted to help answer that question with more definition to help this project be better understood by their peers in the community. So we think forming a committee to study this and then bringing a thoughtful recommendation forward is what's most advantageous instead of just throwing something out sort of willy-nilly. And then we also think it's important as a city to start updating our Parks Master Plan. You might mention or remember that the original bond plan had $20 million for parks in it. 15 of that was catching up things from the 2010 Parks Master Plan. And as we've had our conversations and really thought about needs versus wants, I think there is wisdom in updating the Parks Master Plan to ensure that the things that are funded in a future bond issue for parks are in fact the things that strategically this council and this community still want to do, not the things that were identified in 2010. So those are kind of some of the other things that work that needs to be done in addition to the bond issue to help further carry the conversation forward. Now, Mr. Mayor, we also think it's important to talk about how we're going to start connecting with our community on this issue to understand and explain it better. And our project consultant, Amy Jordan Wooden, is here to do that tonight. But before I ask her to come forward to speak, I thought this would be a good time to pause and take any questions or reflections that the council might have.
Mr. Mayor.
Please proceed.
Mr. City Manager, you mentioned $3 million for the animal shelter to possibly pay off the debt service. Has there been any conversations with the county about doing that? And is it your belief that if we were to pay off the debt service, would they sign over the building to us?
Let me answer your second question first. I would recommend as city manager that we would not engage in any kind of payment of debt service without some sort of signed agreement that would transfer ownership of that facility to the city. I think there's just too much risk in paying that debt. In fact, there may even be legal complications of one entity paying another entity's debt. So I would want to ensure that all the terms and conditions are fully satisfied before any of our taxpayers' dollars are expended. We have brought this issue forward to the county for conversation. I want to be careful how I say this. Right now, I feel like our enthusiasm for this idea is stronger than the county's, but I think the county is very much of a talk to me when you really have money in your hand. You know, right now, this is make-believe money. If the city really has resources to talk about this, then we're willing to talk about it. But right now, I just don't think they're allocating a lot of thought to this issue. So these conversations have not been particularly, fruitful to this point, I will say.
Okay. The second question, one of the bridges that would be replaced is the Kentucky Avenue Bridge. I think it was $2 million. Is that
Yeah,
what
yeah.
I read? Okay. So I believe Kansas City still owns half of this bridge. How would we work through that issue?
I'm going to be very, very blunt. Kansas City has made very clear that they have no intention of putting any funds into this project. And that has included a number of communications back and forth between my office and the city manager's office. That has included many conversation among members of this council, particularly Councilmember Perkins, talking to their peers on the City Council of Kansas City. And it is the position of Kansas City that though a portion of this bridge falls within their jurisdictional boundaries, it's not a bridge that services any of their residential population, which is in fact the truth. That portion of the bridge does not connect to any residential homes around there. Kansas City has shown an interest and a willingness to de-annex that portion of their city into Independence so that we can be investing in infrastructure that would be wholly and fully owned by the city of Independence.
Okay. You mentioned the athletic complex and some of the improvements there. Would any of that include lighting? Because I know I think the last few years there's been some vandalism there.
Yes, there would be, and I can certainly get you an itemized list of everything that's in there, and that is important for everybody to see what this would buy, but that does include, among the amenities that would be replaced or enhanced, lighting in there as well. It's essential to the public safety issues you're speaking to, but I would go even further and say it's essential to, if we want to be a host for these regional tournaments, we've got to be able to keep our ball fields open late into the night and early in the morning, because that's just the way these tournament schedules work.
Okay. The last thing I wanted to bring up was the Justice Center. I've been back and forth on this issue. I've thought it needed to go lower, but I understand why it's at the number that it is. This is going to have a serious effect on some residents of this city. It's going to affect property owners. It's going to affect renters because landlords are going to raise their rent. Right now, our economy is not so great, although I'm hopeful with the new administration coming in, it'll get better, but it's not going to be fast. Gas is outrageous. Groceries are, high. We have a utility that there's no question. We own a utility. There's no question that our rates are going to go up. It's going to happen. So, Mr. City Manager, you live in this city, so let me just ask you this. How do you justify to our residents that they're going to be paying more for this?
You might remember a couple weeks ago that there was the presenter on the Square Master Redevelopment Plan. And, he mentioned that the hard work has been done, which by that he meant there's been a lot of intensive study and planning. 8 years worth, at least, probably longer if we dig through the annals of time. No one is going to come in and do this for us. If Independence wants to reverse some disturbing trends right now, which include our population stagnation, and even if you believe the census figure estimates, even a decline in population since the 2020 census. If we want to bring in additional industry and commerce to our city, you have to have a safe community. The Missouri Chamber of Commerce's main priority now is public safety, making sure the state is safe because businesses and their employees don't want to move to a place they don't feel safe. And I think Independence has an opportunity to do its part. And I think I just catch that last part of what you said because I think that's important. The cost of everything has gone up. And right now, we're working with a project budget that's adding 1.5% every quarter, up to 9% if we don't start till the second quarter of 2026. If we keep waiting to do this, I fear eventually we are going to price ourselves out of the ability to do anything at all, or to do very, very piecemeal improvements that are going to harm efficiencies, add additional costs because you're paying for 2, 3, 4, 5 different buildings now. I think the cost of this is very real. I've calculated the fiscal impact on my assessed valuation. But you have to spend money to make money. We have to start investing in ourselves as a city if we want economic development and redevelopment and new revenues to come into the city to fund all the basic services that we depend on, so we can stop having crappy conversations like reducing bus service, closing the pool, a lot of other things that have been really a bummer to discuss this year with you.
Thank you. That's all I have for now.
Thank you, Councilmember. Anyone else? Other questions? Mr. City Manager, I've got a number unless somebody else has questions. I know the question has come to me from folks I've talked to about the must-haves and the wants. I know you went over that, and I know that I talked to the chief quite a bit today about the must-haves and the wants. And so I don't know if we should have the chief come up and talk about, this, to say, hey, here are the core functions, because we talked about cost and functionality. And if we could have the chief, talk to that, that would be great.
I think that's actually best, Mayor, and here's why. The chief and his team were part of design meetings with the project consulting team for months, having a meeting every week, often many hours each time they met. So his familiarity with this and the tough decisions that were made is much stronger than mine, and I'd love for him to be able to stand for those questions so you can have a more informed dialogue.
Okay. And if I can, to be respectful to Councilmember McCandless, she has a question, so I might have her go first, and then that way we can come back to you, Chief. So please. Councilmember McCandless.
Thank you. I want to ask, now I hear a huge echo. Do you hear that?
We don't. Go ahead.
Okay. Can you speak to the 4 sites that would be closed? I just want to reassure people we're not talking about closing the new police substation that we've opened at Independence Center.
Thank you, Councilmember McCandless, for that. This would close the Canine Kennel, which is located east on Truman Road, just on that eastern side of Missouri 291. So this would close that facility. Some may remember the former animal shelter before the current one. That is the canine unit today. So that would bring that building to its conclusion. That would obviously close the current police station. That would close what is known as the Penniston building. Penniston is also on Truman Road. It is just on that eastern side of the Sermon Center, kind of a metal-looking building with a rickety wooden fence on the side of it. That is where the bomb squad, the motorcycle unit, the SWAT team, and an accident investigations works out of. And then this, again, with the consolidation of municipal court, the municipal court would be moving out of the current city hall and the council chambers for the eventual demolition of this building.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. So should I reiterate the question again so people know what it is, or do you want to rephrase the question how you heard it? So
Must-haves versus wants.
that's perfect. Thank you.
Very good. Mr. Mayor, City Manager Walker, thank you for the opportunity to come before you again. Members of the City Council and the community listening, I could go on ad nauseum. We could be here until midnight to tell you about the thought and level of depth that has gone into the refinement and consolidation of this facility, as well as the ones that the City Manager Walker just mentioned. For the conciseness, I will tell you, it's easy for me to stand up here and confidently defend the plan that is before you and the plan that has been put before the community are must-haves. Everything in there, as a matter of fact, as the city manager highlighted, not only from conceptual design did we leave off the wants or other nice to have but not necessary. We also have to include somewhere in this $123 million the functionality of training space, a physical fitness workout facility, but we left off things like the training facility that included a gymnasium, which has a very reasonable and rational explanation for that need. Currently, we use the Sermon Center and we use that at least monthly or more often, as I told you last week, to do applicant testing. We're getting ready to do our SWAT physical fitness requirements. Our bomb squad has physical fitness requirements. All of those have to be set up, torn down. That takes a day. And we do that every month for our applicant testing as well. So those would be accomplished within that gymnasium piece, as well as our defensive tactics trainings, other community things like female or women rape self-defense classes, other community programming type things that go on inside of those facilities that we currently don't have space to hold those functions. So there is a reasonable and rational explanation for that facility and a very real use for that facility, but due to keeping those costs down and keeping it controlled, that would be out. So again, you have 4 core buildings that would be consolidated. We have already put the investment in the dispatch center that is out there. We have put little to no money into the existing IUC, with the exception of what will be the investigations function, which needs to be conducive for the way they operate. But again, consolidation into open workspaces and future growth within those open workspaces and shared spaces, those were given over the last almost year that we have been meeting at least weekly, if not multiple times weekly, and in between, over weekends, as you all have seen communications, to really refine this down. So again, if you have specific questions, any of you, just for efficiency of time and out of respect for your time, I'm happy to discuss any of those, but I can stand here confidently in front of the community to say, as the city manager pointed out, there is a real cost for doing nothing. I know that there has been a benchmark that has been put before all of you, and it was highlighted again tonight, that is $42 million. I personally, as I told you last week, and I think for the community's benefit, to me that is a fictitious number. That was pre-COVID. It did not include a municipal court, did not include some of the other programmatic functions that were needed and thought of, because it really was in its infancy when it was derailed the last time. This is a full plan. This is a shovel-ready plan. This is what the true cost of waiting looks like post-COVID in this market. And again, to highlight the way the city manager started this, if we had a check, and if any of you have that, I'm more than happy to receive that this evening, for $100 million, this facility is at just under $99 million, ready to go, all in. The rest of that I understand has a real cost, and that is a concern, and to Councilmember Stewart's point, I understand. I live here, I raise a family here, I know that that has an impact. But that is the cost of not having $100 million sitting aside that we can dedicate to starting this project right now. So again, I'll yield with that. If you have specific questions about different functions, I know you all have been able to look at this in depth. I'm happy to answer those, but I can stand here saying that this is, at bare bones, what we would need to consolidate these facilities and provide a police facility that is not paved in gold, but has the essential functions that any modern police department has, so that we can go out and provide the excellent service that we need and that this community deserves.
Thank you. Any further questions? Please proceed.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, so with the training facility, I mean, you listed some of the things that could have been potentially done there, but also one of the thoughts that hopefully this never happens, but it was going to be utilized as a mass casualty facility. Is that correct?
That is correct. And again, as the city manager pointed out too, the comparison to Lenexa, which I know has been brought up in the community, they do have a training facility. So again, difference between what they were able to include, what we cut as a cost measure, yes. Directly to your point, Councilmember, if you think about, and it hasn't been that long ago, certainly within my career, we had the microburst. We just had the tornado just a couple years ago out east that took out, but we had the microburst there at 291 where the Arby's is, that took out several infrastructure there. If you think about the Joplin tornado, more catastrophic community transformation, leveling type storm, that's what we deal with here in the Midwest more so than we are going to deal with a hurricane or something of that nature. When Joplin happened, we sent teams on 1-week rotations down to supplement their functions of law enforcement. If that is our community, citizens need somewhere to go in the interim, but in the case of a mass casualty incident like that, we need to house law enforcement. Hotels are filled with citizens. Hotels are filled with other vendors and other services that need to get in here. We have to have those services to supplement our city and our safety that come in here, and that would provide for that. In other instances, that isn't a mass casualty event, but more of an inclement weather or a community need, we could then provide COTS with Army Reserves and or Army National Guard, you know, those kinds of suppliers and partnerships that we could set up and have an intake center.
Sure.
If we needed to.
So my point with that was we really were looking at to function and to use that, but we also understood that maybe not right now. So we scaled that back and scaled that down. But everything that we've looked at has good use, future use, and looking to serve our citizens the best way that we can.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else have further questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Please proceed.
Can you talk, one of the more expensive things in the plan is the firing range. I don't think a lot of people understand why that's completely necessary. Can you talk about the requirements for the police officers?
Absolutely. So by state statute, we're required to qualify, which again is just it's a qualification course. Now, for the community's benefit, these are not the qualification courses like you see on TV where everybody's standing behind, in this case, a podium, and they're firing downrange at some target and moving back and forth. That's not modern firing range standards anymore. We have a dynamic course where you move, you shoot on the move, you do all sorts of different things. So we have to do that multiple times a year by state statute in order to certify our police officers. That was the standard up until the Supreme Court issued new case law that became precedent that requires that police departments engage in what they call scenario-based, reality-based training. That means as we encounter situations, you can imagine any one of them, because we deal with them frequently in this community, we have to prepare for those. Again, we have a saying in police work, the mind can't go where the body's never been. It's our requirement and obligation as leadership within the police department to provide those environments for our officers to be able to train through. That happens inside of a range like we have. That's programmed here. This allows us to pull a vehicle in and fight around a vehicle with firearms, something that you don't get without the facility be able to provide that level of training. But something that we encounter, as we see unfortunately all too often in today's world, it's just a different world. So yes, it's important. It's an important piece. The other one, I know, again, I've heard many concerns. Why don't we just have a vacant stretch of land with a berm? We're required to do night fire qualifications, and you can only do that when the sun is not out, when it is daylight hours, if you have something outdoor. This allows us to, as the city manager alluded to, it is fully soundproof, has structural requirements that allows us to make it completely pitch black. We can elevate lighting in that facility accordingly. And again, this is typical of most modern police facilities, knowing that that's what it's for. Yeah, so as the city manager pointed out, and we talked about this, but for the community's benefit, you know, the Blue Springs Police Department and the struggles. I know that you all have been provided with the response that I updated currently, or recently, I should say, as of last week. So most police departments have a firing range component. All of the surrounding jurisdictions for us, Lee Summit, Sugar Creek, Jackson County Sheriff's Office, Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, all have their own independent functioning firing facilities as well as we do. So all of your smaller municipalities obviously schedule time at different various points, Blue Springs being the outlier there. So the thought was initially, again, this is sort of rumored within our collaborative partnerships, that they would do both public and private between those other ranges where they could find time, as well as use private facilities to be able to accomplish some of that. I can tell you, as I updated all of you last week, in recent conversations, that has not proved fruitful. The Blue Springs Police Department has recently reached out to the Sugar Creek Range, which we have shared dates there, and they were only able to secure 4 days in all of 2025 due to the demand that is there, which was not adequate for their needs to meet their minimum requirements from state statute that I referenced. Thus, it forced them to now go have to pay somewhere like the Jackson County range if they can get space and time there, which again fills up quickly, or continue to expand outside of that. What does that mean for us? First off, a city like Blue Springs, which is half the size of ours as far as their sworn force, they're already scrambling, which means we put ourselves in that mix. Now we have to start going through the same operation if we didn't have one of those facilities where we would scramble. And as we keep expanding the map, that requires our officers to drive. The other fiscal part of that is very real for us is Blue Springs or Lee Summit have the financial ability to be able to build in training time for their officers when they are on their time off. We don't have those due to budgetary constraints. So you are literally taking officers off the streets that should be responding to calls, taking them out and having them drive to surrounding jurisdictions in order to get their qualification time that they have to maintain by state statute to be a police officer, and then eventually bringing them back into service. All of that means reduction in service, response times go up because there are no extra personnel to accomplish that.
Mr. Mayor,
Please proceed.
on the facilities that you use for training, does the police department pay for that? Or do you have to pay for those to use those?
The current training facility, like Sermon Center, and
Yes.
We didn't for a long time, but recently, yes, there was a citywide function, so now we are having to pay a fee for use of those rental space. Anything that we do outside of, we have to negotiate and try to finagle. We have a very supportive and incredible community that bends over backwards where we can. Things like Midwest Public Risk, where we've held meetings and offsite events there. The Chamber of Commerce. The list I could be here all night. But yes, where there are facility needs that we have that are specific, like the Sermon Center that we occur on a monthly basis, we have to pay those fees.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember McCandless, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Mayor. Chief Dustman, is it possible that we would be able to charge other police forces to come and train in our facility? Or will that space be used so frequently that there isn't that opportunity?
Yeah, so we, I guess really probably the very candid answer, Councilmember McCandless, is possible. They're in the training facility, the way it was, the training building that's adjacent to the range there, again, that's not included in the current programming. The thought was that we could host trainings and have spots. That we could sell off seats. That happens quite frequently. In other words, we would host some sort of a national training program. We come in and let's say just, again, for round figures, that costs $20,000. They provide X number of seats to us as the host agency because we're providing the space and all of the requirements, so we get to train our folks for free, and then we sell those seats off by posting it out to other outside departments. So yes, there is a function there that stays within the training function that allows us to then host other things and keep our people better trained for less dollars. Same goes for firearms courses. There are those kinds of courses too. But as far as selling it for open access, my cautionary tale for that would be yes, I think you're correct in that we will be using that and utilizing that more frequently than we can just schedule out. On a consistent basis for use. The other piece of that is access. We have to, because this is a secure facility, you have to then have some sort of staff that are there at those hours to be able to let people in, out, to be able to access that.
It just sounds as though if firing range is such a commodity, it may be a way for us to offset some of the cost by generating our own revenue in the future. So just a consideration, but thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Anyone else? Further questions? Please proceed.
Question for the city manager, but I want to make sure everybody's done with Chief Duff.
Okay. Well, stay close, Chief. Sorry. Thank you.
Mr. Walker, there's a bit over $22 million in this plan for on the Justice Center for contingencies and escalation. Let's assume just for a second that we go through our bidding process, we bid things out well, we get, either prices, that are at or below what we initially budgeted for, and we don't have to use those contingencies or don't have that escalation. What then, what's the result of that? How can we, we don't have to borrow that money, correct?
When the voters vote on this issue and it is approved, what they're essentially doing is giving the city permission to borrow up to $197 million. The city is still going to go through all of its normal processes, like if we were going to issue our annual street overlay contract or our construction contract for the Justice Center. And where those bids come in at is the amount that the city will then draw down off of that debt that's been authorized. All that $197 million means is that's the maximum amount. You can't go over that. But good on us if we stay underneath of that. That's going to lighten the tax burden on the community. It's going to leave more margin for future needs that we could go back to the community and discuss. No tax bond issues potentially. So there is nothing in there that says just because that's been authorized, we have to spend that full amount.
And just to be clear, if we don't use it on the Justice Center, we can't turn around and use it on the streets.
Let's be very clear about that. So if question one passes, those dollars have to be used for those specific public safety uses. We can't say, well, that came in under and we saved $20 million because we got the project started right away and we didn't have those contingencies. Let's go do some streets. Can't do that. It is for the purpose that the voters have authorized those bonds to be spent on.
I think those are my questions at this point. I've not been shy by saying that I have concerned about the dollar amounts that we're talking about, but I do understand them. I wish it was different, but I'm not sure how we propose I don't think we can propose a second-rate plan, if you will. It just doesn't make sense to say, we're not going to build this out of cardboard instead of concrete. So I hope for those contingencies not to be needed and those sort of things so that we can make the burden as light on the taxpayers as possible.
I would agree with your assessment, Councilmember Fears, and also add from a professional standpoint and the challenges that I've issued to Chief Dustman and his team to ensure that there is every last bit of blood squeezed out of this turnip. I wish we could roll the clock back and it were 2018, but we had this political will and this community support to have this discussion because those potential square footage costs were much more attractive and much less burdensome. But what the reason I have brought this issue to the council for your consideration these last 12 to 18 months is we don't want it to be 6 years from now, 6 years later, and we're looking at figures that are just untenable and unattainable.
Right. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember McCandless.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. City Manager, if we continue to build commercial property, and commercial property is taxed at a different rate than residential property. As those begin to come online, the new buildings, that will absorb some of the repayment cost for these bonds and lighten the burden on residents. Do I understand that correctly?
You do, and if I can just add a little color commentary to that, because that's an excellent point. The full amount, let's say $197 million was issued, it was needed, and that was fully spent, and all the projects have been done, and that's the amount that's owed. The fixed amount of annual debt service is always going to stay the same. It's not going to cost more. We're not going to owe more. It's always going to be a fixed cost. What could change, the variable that could change is as new construction is added into the city, we are now have more people paying into the pot, so the amount that's owed per person is going to go down because we're able to generate more revenue because of the growth that we have experienced. So that 82 cents, I would say confidently, is a worst-case scenario of the community does not change at all. There is no new construction in this city for 20 years, and we issue every one of the $197 million.
And just for repeating what I think is important information, the day this passes, we will not issue all $197 million worth of bond. We would borrow that as our building progresses so that this would meter in over time from people's property tax assessments. Is that a fair statement?
That's very fair. I think we've all heard of the term pay-as-you-go. This would be borrow-as-you-go. So let me use the streets as an example. I told you we could see that as staff being a 5-year plan to align with our 5-year capital improvements plan. Let's say that it's evenly distributed and we issue that in $6 million tranches. That property tax impact is only going to be increased by the amount of debt that has been issued. So you're not going to see 82 cents the day after this election. Much more likely you're going to see that 5, 7, 10 years down the line when these funds have been fully expended.
And you mentioned when we paid for streets that would be divided out in yearly aliquots over a 5-year period. So all 35 million would, I think that's the amount, would not be issued in the first year. I am interested, since we are looking at matching our existing street tax with this additional money from the GO bond, does that make it easier for us to be able to go out to bid for the street paving companies? Because I know that's not something that we do in-house.
Oh, this is a great point, and thank you for asking. Contractors work on volume, and they are going to go where there is money to be made. And when you're competing in a region with 119 cities, cities like Kansas City that have tens of millions of dollars that they're putting out for bid every year, the state of Missouri putting out tens of millions of dollars every year, and then the multi-million-dollar contracts in the smaller municipalities. We are competing for the limited talent that does this kind of work every year. The more we can put on the table, that not only benefits the quality of infrastructure in our community, but it's going to benefit the quality of bids that we get and the timeliness of the work that we can do, because contractors are going to see Independence as a place that's open for business.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else, other questions? Mr. City Manager, I've got a follow-up question on Councilmember Fear's question. With regards to the cushion, and I don't know if this is a question you can answer or who would be the people to answer this question, but typically with the cushions they've put in there historically, and I know you don't have a lot of time on that, but just what's their realistic expectation that they would use all of that, and what's the typical algorithm of how much should be used? I'm not sure who would be the best person to ask that question, or we can ask it another. We can find out another time.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Mr. Mayor, I would get somebody from our owner's representative firm, Project Advocates, to help answer that question. They are the ones who put that budget together, and so I apologize I'm not able to answer that this evening, but I'll make sure we have somebody who can get that answer for you, because that's an important question.
It's kind of an off-the-wall question, but just following up on what Councilmember Fears asked, I thought his was a good question, and to follow up on that. And anyone else have further questions before we go on to the GO bond presentation? We're at 7:25. It'd probably be good to take a 5-minute break. Or do you have another question? Please proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have maybe not so much a question. Well, I do have actually a question. But let me just kind of frame some of my thoughts up as I'm looking at the plan development time and thinking, gosh, I've been here since 2016. The only other time that I get these flashbacks is when I'm on the Audit and Finance Committee meeting and we get to see those TIF projects roll off, and that makes me really feel old. I would say this council has taken this conversation pretty serious. As long as I've been up here on the council, the conversation of tickling a general obligation bond has been thrown out and discussed and talked, but no real serious steps have come forward. And we did this in a natural progression of steps that have led us to this decision. Up until now, we have really worked to tighten our belts. We have worked to leverage every dollar that we can through federal grants, state funding. 24 Highway is a good example of that. We have searched out these matching funds just wherever we can. So now it's time to take the bold step and ask our citizens to reinvest in ourselves, reinvest in our city. And we've talked a lot about our police department. Our city has grown quite a bit since that first police building. The dynamic and the stuff that you gentlemen and you women deal with on the street has changed tremendously since I was first on the council in 1996. I've seen those changes too. This is a massive investment that has massive return and benefit for our citizens. The Citizen Committee, they were put together, we listened to them. They were in a strong consensus of a justice center, and we've worked with that and we've kept that. We as a council, we've listened to the committee who could not find consensus with a rec center at this point, and we listen to that and we understand that. And that is something that I believe our citizens will need, and we'll look at it, and we'll start that committee soon to reinvest within ourselves. I've talked to Councilwoman Vaught just today, because I would say her district and in my district have some of the more vulnerable areas. So considering this dollar amount, considering the need, considering the impact is something that we don't take lightly. I know the rest of the council do not take lightly either. But this is a bold action that we are asking our citizens. And I think this is something that is truly needed to move us forward. I'm excited about it. I'm ready for the next steps to go on and start the campaign, start talking to the groups that are out there. I was looking at the sidewalks. I'm already getting folks that are close to Ott Elementary, Mill Creek Elementary, because those are true issues that are there and still persist. So looking forward to getting that conversation going. Another side note, squirrel moment for this conversation, though. There's been some news feeds, some discussion with our theater folks. I just want to clear everything out just a little bit now, and that is the Sermon Center was never part of the general obligation bond conversation. Is that correct, Mr. City Manager?
There was a concept to build a more modern recreation center. There was a infrastructure need, there was an amenity need, there was a space need. So replacement of that facility was being contemplated. What I would add to that is the National Frontier Trails Museum Master Plan that was presented to this council in 2023. And the city is currently going through the process of identifying a firm to now do a feasibility study to identify all the important economic factors associated with that. That does include performing arts space in that. So while the theater wasn't initially part of a recreation field house, that was more geared toward healthy outcomes and sports tourism. The Trails Museum all along has contemplated having that performing arts space in it because we envisioned that being not just a historical amenity, but a cultural center as well.
Well, I would say, and I think I can speak for everybody up here, we are for the performing arts.
Yes.
We are wanting to work with the different groups and entities there that have interest in this conversation. I think it would probably be good that we have those conversations. I've talked to several over the past month and a half regarding this. So hopefully we can get that scheduled up on the books. And I know Councilwoman Wiley has offered her time to help with those conversations as well, just to ease concerns and have those conversations.
When the Trails Museum Master Plan was being developed, the consulting firm visited with a number of groups and individuals that were identified as key stakeholders, and the Theater Guild, I may get in trouble, it may not be the right term, so sorry theater people. The theater group was being sought as a key stakeholder that needed to be involved in. And the value they bring to the community, the central nature that they could play in that becoming a true cultural center was seen in that museum master plan. And yeah, I would just echo what you're saying and assure that that is not an asset that's being forgotten or falling off the table.
Sure. Well, thank you for your time and effort, the Citizens Committee time and effort, staffs and everybody, and looking forward to the next steps.
Yes, yes.
Any other further questions? So let's, before we go to the next step, let's take a 5-minute break and we'll come back and then talk about that. Thank you. Michelle. You'll get your moment. You'll get your shot. No, I've already got you. But now you can return the favor. All right. So, Mr. Walker, we're going to talk about the education process of citizens. Say what's in the value, what's the process?
Yes, sir. Obviously, as we've said many times, Independence has not previously passed a general obligation bond issue, and an issue of this magnitude warrants and deserves intensive communication and education. So the city has retained the services of Amy Jordan Wooden, who has participated in similar successful issues in other municipalities in the region, to help us with our education and information efforts. So I'm going to have Amy speak to you tonight to give you a sense of what our communication efforts will look like, and would welcome any feedback the council has of things to enhance or improve those communication strategies.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Again, my name is Amy Jordan Wooden, and I am honored to join the staff and all of you in working on this proposal. I had the distinct pleasure of working with the city of Kansas City, Missouri, as a special consultant to then city manager Troy Schulte when they passed their $800 million GEO bond proposal back in 2017. And one of the things that I did is I worked with city communications into help crafting messages to meet the audience where they're at. And in this case, it's the citizenry. So what city communications will focus on is education, not advocacy, right? That's very, very important. It's under the revised statute of what is allowed and what is not allowed. And so we'll inform the community about the GEO bond. GEO bond is not a simple measure in which to understand. It's very complicated. Obviously, we've spent many, many hours on this. So it takes a pretty robust communications effort, which we'll engage in. You can see here, we've already developed some branding that we'll be able to use whenever we're talking about the GEO bond proposal. It will be this multifaceted communication strategy. We will have a ton of different documents available. Key messaging, frequently asked questions, a PowerPoint deck that will be used in earnest. And we want to make information available, very easy to access for the public, at a very high level that's easy to understand, but also provide the citizenry the ability to click down and get into much more level of detail. Obviously, we'll have a variety of communications. You can see here some of those that we talk about. This is a website that we've already started developing with the city communications team. It's not live yet. We're working, obviously, we've been working behind the scenes to prepare as the Citizens Committee has made their deliberations and you engage in your deliberations. This is a screenshot actually from Lenexa. Lenexa's come up quite a bit tonight. And this is a story map software that we have available that the public will be able to go and look at various projects. So for instance, we could highlight the Kentucky Bridge, right? And you can go and click on it, and then it can give you a short narrative about why the Kentucky Bridge needs to be replaced, the funds that would be used towards that. We can also include an audio component to that. We'll also do a lot of targeted outreach that will involve Zach. I've already told him I'm going to hijack his calendar, so he'll be out there speaking. I would imagine many of you, we will turn to you for opportunities to get out there and speak, as well as members who want to participate from the Citizens Advisory Committee that deliberated this. Here's another sample of what the banners might look like, or written collateral that we might have out there. You'll see we'll utilize QR codes. So again, you can learn the very basics, or you can go down as many levels as you want for detail. There was written collateral, for instance, utility bill insert. I think this has been utilized in the past, but again, just informing folks when they get their utility bill about the GEO bond and what is in that package.
I mentioned audio recordings as a part of the story map, but again, when the Citizens Advisory Committee, when we went out on field trip day, Zach was in the van with many of the members, and I got to ride with Councilwoman McCandless and her husband. But as Zach is talking to the members, we had him on speakerphone so we could hear what he was saying. And it sort of spawned the idea of like, you could almost make this into a podcast. So at various points throughout the city where the GeoBond might impact, say, the athletic complex, we could post QR codes whereby if you scan, you would get a 60-second video recording that explains what the GeoBond would do here at, say, the outdoor athletic complex. Open houses is another area, especially perhaps with our historic sites, and in a controlled way, police department. So individuals who really did want to get an up-close view of what we're talking about in terms of the capital projects could do so. And then, of course, there'll be an earned media component. And in fact, we've already started to see a few of those stories now. I would imagine in January, then those will increase in earnest, especially then as you near Election Day. So that's sort of a brief overview, but it's a very intensive and deliberate effort that city communications will engage in to educate everyone and try to answer as many questions as possible. With that, I am happy to take any questions.
Anyone, any questions? Please proceed.
Amy, you talked a lot about electronic stuff and you know, QR codes and all kinds of things. What about our folks that are, you know, that don't deal with that stuff?
Sure.
How are we going to communicate with them?
Of course. We'll be looking and building out a calendar that, again, will start in earnest in January. So there'll be opportunities where we will go out to the community, Rotary meetings, homeowners association meetings, chambers, business associations, et cetera. In addition, we'll be talking to audiences that we think will really want to learn about this. All of our elementary schools that stand to have new sidewalks will be able to share information with those school superintendents so that they can communicate with their audiences as well. So there'll be plenty of opportunities out there that don't involve a cell phone to find out information, because we know we want to meet everyone where they're at, and we know that not everybody's out there and gets their information electronically.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else, other questions? Please
Mayor.
proceed.
Not so much a question as is, Amy, thank you for all your work. It's been a pleasure kind of getting to know you over the past few months and stuff. It's more than a few months here lately. So thank you for your expertise and your guidance as we're navigating these uncharted waters. And they're a little scary, but you bring that expertise. I think that can help bring some calm to that and some good direction so we don't step over the line, but yet get the communication out successfully to the people that we need to. So.
It's a very exciting time for independence, I will say. And this is, it is scary, but it is exciting to take that first big step to make these investments in your community, which then can then really steamroll into bigger and better and greater things.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Anyone else, other, Councilmember?
Mr.
please.
Mayor. So just to clarify, city staff can educate but not advocate. We can advocate, correct?
You can, according
Okay.
to, right, as elected officials, you can advocate.
So, so I imagine we're going to need to knock doors with door hangers and get lists. And I think for the residents who don't have computers, that's probably going to be a good idea for us.
We will do everything that we can, and of course, we're going to put everything out there, and so that it is in the public domain. Mm-hmm. And what you decide to do with that information, or if there's an organized campaign out there to do with that information, to then take it that step further, of course, can happen. But anything that we produce, again, is public domain.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else, other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any closing remarks, Mr. City Manager?
Mr. Mayor, I know it is a holiday week, and I appreciate the council's indulgence tonight to discuss this very important matter, and we will be here as staff to help you over the next several weeks as you bring this ordinance forward for consideration. And wish you and your colleagues a happy Thanksgiving. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone have a happy Thanksgiving, and we'll call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.